Trump campaign colluded with Russia and that they are shutting down their year-long investigation without consulting Democrats on that same committee. I want to bring in now Congressman Adam Schiff. He is the ranking member of the Intelligence Committee. Congressman, we appreciate you joining us here this evening. How did you find out that the investigation is shutting down and this Republican report is finding no collusion by the president?
Well, and this is sort of typical these days. I found out by reading in the newspaper. The Republicans leaked it to the press before even informing us. But, Dawn, it doesn't come as a complete surprise. The Republicans have said for some time they're under immense pressure to shut down the investigation. And it was apparent really from the very beginning, from last March when our chairman went on that midnight run to the White House, that their real object was protecting the president. It wasn't doing a credible investigation. And so they went through the motions of bringing witnesses in, and we learned a great deal through those witnesses. But when we needed to compel them to answer questions, when people like Steve Bannon would stonewall, or Corey Lewandowski or others, all too often they were willing to accept no for an answer. They would ask, very conclusory questions like, did you conspire, did you conclude? And if they said no, the Republicans were content to leave it at that. That's not conducting an investigation. That's going through the motions. So the fundamental problem from the beginning was that my colleagues viewed their job as protecting their client, the president, rather than getting to the truth. And I think that's a grave disservice to the country.
So what happened? I'm sure you voiced your concerns about that. Democrats in that committee, did they not voice their concerns? Did you voice your concerns, and how was it received?
Of course we voiced our concerns. We've given the majority the names of witnesses that were key individuals that were never brought before the committee that we needed to bring in. We gave them lists of documents that we should be subpoenaing. Records, for example,
do you have
from
any
Twitter,
examples of any of what you just said, what you needed to bring in?
Yes, no, absolutely. There are witnesses, for example, who are aware of the Trump Tower meeting before it took place. That would be natural to bring in before the committee. What did you know? How did you find out about it? Who communicated to you what the purpose of the meeting was? There are phone records associated with that meeting that would identify potentially whether the president's son talked to the president about that meeting. There are contradictions between witnesses. Just this week, for example, it was revealed that George Nader had informed the special counsel that he facilitated these meetings, or this meeting in the Seychelles that Eric Prince had with this Russian banker as a way of setting up a secret back channel. That contradicts the sworn testimony of Eric Prince before our committee. But the Republicans have decided they just would rather not know who's telling the truth. They don't want to pursue any further this investigation if it may lead to something that would harm the president and their party. And that's, I think, deeply regrettable. Now, we'll continue to do the investigation to the best that we can. We continue to have people cooperating with us who want to share information with our committee. But obviously, it's going to be a great impediment to our learning the full facts that they're trying to shut this down this way.
Let's talk a little bit more about what you have been saying, because when this first started, almost from the beginning, Devin Nunes has been working to undermine the investigation. Characterize what his role has been. Do you think that he scuttled this investigation? Was he the one behind this, or is it a group effort?
Well, the short history of this is almost 1 year ago, March 20th, we had the first open hearing of our investigation. That hearing was with James Comey. I laid out in my opening statement all of the allegations that needed to be investigated, and I posed the question, could we do this in a bipartisan way? And I pointed out that the national interest really called upon us to do this in a bipartisan way. In that hearing, James Comey dropped the bombshell that the Trump campaign had been under investigation since July of the election year for possible collusion with Russia for counterintelligence purposes. And the Republicans found that hearing, they told me thereafter, was a tragedy for them, was a terrible development for them. And I'm sure the White House came down hard on the chairman of our committee, because it was the very next day after that hearing that the chairman went on that midnight run.
You think that Nunes was acting at the behest of the president?
Well, he was certainly acting in the interest of the president and has all along. Even when he was forced to step aside from the committee, he continued to do the bidding of the White House by attempting to impugn the credibility of the Department of Justice and the FBI by taking up basically the storyline, the narrative that the president wanted to tell. And that continued through the release of that partisan Nunes memo, and it's been a continuing problem. The only tool that Democrats have had, the only tool that I have had to force the majority to bring any witnesses in, to seek any information, is by pointing the public spotlight on how they were conducting the investigation. That was the only tool we had. We, I think, used it effectively at times, but it's no substitute for having a subpoena.
I got to ask you a quick thing. One of our intelligence experts here on CNN said that both you and Republicans he said you spent too much time on CNN, and he said that Devin Nunes spent too much time at the White House, and that this investigation, as it relates to Congress, really had no chance because it was partisan from all along, from the beginning. How do you respond to that?
You know, there's always a tendency in the interest of appearing to be nonpartisan to say a pox on both houses. But really, I think that just avoids the hard work of assigning responsibility. Yes, we have gone on television to say the Republicans need to bring Steve Bannon back in, or Don Jr. made a false claim of privilege, because it was the only way to hold the majority accountable. It was the only way to force them at times to do the work that needed to be done. And I think that was important for us to do. It's how I think the country learned where the administration was stonewalling the committee and where the majority was really not living up to its constitutional obligation. So I think it really is all too easy and a bit of a cop-out to say, well, a pox on both their houses. The reality is the mission of the chairman from the beginning was to protect the president, not follow the facts wherever they would lead. And that was a fundamental problem that we had to deal with, and it left us in the position of either going along with essentially a whitewash or calling out the majority every step of the way. And that's the course I think we were forced to take.
Congressman Adam Schiff, we appreciate